But what if a readiness document says that a lot of work needs to happen before jumping into a digital transformation project? How long can a client wait? And what if they refuse to do all the prerequisites?
Well, I think this is a great question, and we're gonna hit a little bit on this later on in our presentation. But it's never. I would say that with all of this, it's never too late to start. And when you say how long can a client wait, well, I think the key is that it's really important to get started. So if you don't have if they refuse to do all the prerequisites, if they don't have the time, or they don't see the importance, it's still important to get something started. So when we talk about this readiness document, while we might not be putting a lot of formality around it, I think that the key is that it's something that you just need to jump into. So, really, I like to refer to it as, if you don't know what your starting point is, and if you skip this step, how do you know what you need to do to get to where you're going? If you don't know where you are now, you're never going to be able to know what the steps are to get you to where you want to go, just because you don't know where you are.
Absolutely. And then I'll bring up this one too, and maybe we'll start with you, Donia, on this piece of it. And get your insight. I know your guys are chomping at the bit to talk. All our OCMs are, and I feel that way too. Do you ever find a challenge to get the right timing in the communication plans? Too early, people ignore it as irrelevant, but needs to give the audience enough warning of what's coming and how they're going to be impacted. So can you speak to that a little bit, Donia?
Yes, I can. Thank you, Kyla. Doing all of this in reality is challenging because the world is obviously moving fast. There's a lot of risks that might come up. So, of course, there are challenges that come up. And, so, sometimes there's a feel that the timing is never right. But the important thing is that regardless of the challenges, it needs to be done. You might not, if you keep on waiting and saying the time is not right, nothing will go out. So, Carla, if you can please just pull up the rest of the question as well. I know I'm tackling the first part of it. So my answer to that is, even if there are challenges, it is very important to get the communication out there. And just to highlight that we spoke about multiple channels. And you're right. Some people don't have time to read an email, or an email is not the best way, for example, for some people. So try and be consistent with the messaging, get it out there. For example, I'll just give you something really practical, is if you have all of the leadership aligned, a simple thing is to request that in all the team meetings, they just update all the employees in the area about what's happening, where we are, and some of the key challenges. It could literally be as simple as that, to tackle the challenges of the timing and holding off because of risks. I hope I answered the question correct, the question that was asked. Unfortunately, I cannot see the questions while I'm screen sharing. So if I've missed anything, please let me know, Kyla.
No worries. We have some great questions coming in, but let's keep going on your hows here, and then we'll jump back in. So keep popping those in the chat. We're watching them.
Thank you so much, Kyla, and thank you everybody for your engagement. We're going to next talk about the change impact plan. And when we started off, we said the change readiness is really the meat. It has all the information. And between Nate and I, we agreed that change impact plan is probably the heart of everything, because this is where you really start to get into the details of the change impact that's happening. And what's very important to highlight here is that this is all the types of change. You bring in, if there's going to be a process change or a role change, it's not just the items relating to the technology. And really go through every change one by one, looking at the degree of impact of the change, which groups it's going to affect, what's the perception of the change by those groups, and then coming out of that is what are the action plans that are going to be put into place. And those actions can feed into your change management plan or back into your communications plan. And then you can also create a heat map where you look at what are the top changes and what are the top priorities. I just want to make sure I've told you everything here. So, and what some people ask about a stakeholder assessment. Often in the work we do, we include the stakeholder assessment as part of the change impact. And as I said, mapping out what changes are affecting which groups. So this is really done to be able to track the details of the changes and to know which groups it's going to impact, which geographies it's going to impact, and to know what the types of changes are and that they are all being tackled. Nate, over to you to talk a bit on the how this is all done.
Yeah, so this is really, again, kind of the meat of it, and this is really kind of the most challenging part of most of the change impact initiatives that we undertake. And this is really when we sit down, this is spending a lot of time with the executives and the end users to sit down and not so much focus on what their job is today. That's very important to say, how are you doing it today? But how are you doing it today? How are you going to be doing how are you going to be conducting business in the future, and what that change is. It's really sitting down and finding out, what are tracking all the changes. So that sometimes it's as little as we're going to be calling fields different names. We're going to be tracking things differently, all the way through to the new technology will change the way our organization is structured. People are doing their jobs. The different work streams will be divvying the work up differently. So it's really sitting down and saying, what are those challenges? What are the what are we what are the big ones? What are the small ones? Keeping track of all of them, and really, while everything's important, let's focus on the top change impacts. Let's address those, and let's really make sure that we have a good assessment of what are our opportunities, what are our challenges, what are our strengths, and what are our weaknesses. Are we ready for this change? Is your impact? Do we need to train differently? Do we need to put different skill sets into our employees? Or is this something that it's just going to be, I turn on a screen tomorrow morning, it looks a little bit different, I call things a little bit different within the system, and it's really not going to be much of a change. So it's sitting down and just getting a really clear assessment on where we are, where we're going to be, and how ready we are for the impact that's going to happen with the new initiative.
Excellent stuff, guys. We obviously have more questions. So I'm going to read this one. It's from one of our viewers on YouTube. So thank you so much for watching. Sometimes the management requires plans with timelines when actual readiness is not yet established. How can you tackle this situation and convince management to focus on the readiness first?
Oh, that's a great question. I think it's just probably the best way that I would answer that is just to sit down and really clearly lay out what the initiative is, have a good plan, and show the importance of each one of the steps. I know that that's a little bit of a high level answer, and I'm not sure if I'm answering the question correctly, but I think it's really just sitting down and saying, here's our comprehensive plan for the entire initiative. Laying it out and talking through the importance of to get through this initiative.
And Nate, if I could add to that, something to that, we almost want to say it's never too late. So what I've seen happen in this scenario is often at one point you'll see the negative impact of not having done the readiness. Perhaps the changes already, if you have several releases, you might see that already after one release, there's no response, there's no adoption. So it's very important that even if you haven't done the readiness up front, to still go back, pause, and look and use that to go back to leaders and say, well, we need to do it differently this time. Often, unfortunately, it's learning through mistakes in this case. And I'm just reading the question on my other screen here. When readiness, what I think is also important, just that first part is about how to tackle it when readiness is not yet established, is if you as an individual are aware of potential challenges or potential pitfalls that you really believe this is not going to work, this change is not going to be effective if we don't address, have the courage and be direct to go and actually show what those pitfalls are or what those challenges are, instead of just, saying, let's do a readiness. Sometimes leaders really need to see the practical outcomes. I hope that helps.
Yeah, I think so. And I'll just add, even though I'm not on the panel, but I just like to share my opinion. You guys know that. But so I think it's one thing is to bring in the experts, because a lot of times that internal trust isn't always established, which is not a bad thing. But bringing in data around external change management consultants or change management experts to show your executive team or your management team, like, this is our experience, this is the data around what we see as far as failures if you don't establish that readiness. So just, a little color for you there. But thank you for the questions. I know you have more here in the chat, and we'll get to them as well, but I'll hand it back over to you, Donia and Nate.
Thank you, Kyla. All right, so next up is the training plan. And as with the communication plan, this is a comprehensive plan of the training support that's required. And very importantly, as mentioned with the comms plan, it should look at the training that's required during the implementation, but also ongoing training that's going to be required. And that will be assessed. Actually, our next topic is metrics and KPIs, but it's important to realize that you'll need some kind of feedback mechanism in order to understand the training gaps, even after going live. So again, it's not like, let's train everybody, send out user manuals, the initiative has gone live, and then you think that training is done. So please remember that when you're looking at a training plan. And as with the comms plan, it looks at the different stakeholder groups. So often when I've done this previously, I would look at the stakeholder groupings that were addressed in the communications plan. That could potentially be a match. Or I can give you another example where I was part of a Workday rollout for a large organization, and the training was tailored against the key user groups. In this case was like the HR community, the management team, and then the employees. So we just had 3 groupings in that case. And very, very important is to look at the methods of training. Really, it's not just screenshots, or a manual. There's a lot of different methods that can be used, as well as different resources. So you might consider, for example, having internal trainers, which case they would need to be trained. So in that scenario, you would do train the trainers. Or alternatively, on this Workday project, for example, we had videos, we had online FAQ, we had online forums, and something that I think was very successful was we used the change champions to actually be super users. And so in every area, there was a super user, and people could literally go to a person and ask them, how do I do this? And that's also kind of part of the training. That was before COVID, so we were all in an office and you could go to one person. But of course, you could still have a super user as an expert, even in the virtual space. And those are really some of the key messages around what the training plan is. And why it's done is to make sure that the educational needs are met throughout the initiative. I'm going to emphasize it again. And post the initiative, to have that ongoing learning until you feel that the status quo has been reached.
Okay, so when we talk about the how on the training plan, it's really a pretty straightforward way that our methodology that we help organizations create these training plans. And it's really first sitting down and saying, what are the end user groups? Again, different groups are going to require different training depending on their usage of the new technology, and their comfort with technology as a whole. And then it's really sitting down and saying, what are the select training methods that are available? Again, we find a lot of times, and especially in organizations that haven't completed a technology initiative in the last 5 years, things a lot different now. So that we're all used to 10, 15 years ago, where you put a manual in front of someone, they flip through page 1, page 2 and they go through and use the system. Now there's a lot more interactive ways of training. There's a lot more opportunities to individual specific user. Then we sit there and say, what are the strengths, weaknesses, and gaps with the training methods and the resources in an organization? Do they have a formal training organization? Do they have an education department? Do they have employees in other areas throughout the organization? And is this something we can piggyback on that? And then it's really sitting down and saying, what is the timeline, and how are we going to work back from go live, post go live, working backwards to say, when do we start training? I think that's really important here to talk about the fact that without fail, every one of our clients, we talk about the fact that when we kick off a change management initiative, training, even though it's far down the line as far as an implementation, is really something that needs to start today. You really need to sit down and say, how are we going to train the people? And you really have to start with that mindset of, how are we going to get people ready to use the technology? If you have the technology, you can have the best technology in place. If people don't know how to use it, if they're not trained efficiently and effectively, you're going to fail. That we say, hey, right now, let's start from the beginning. And as we're going through this implementation, let's think about how we're going to get people ready to use it and how we're going to make them comfortable with the system going forward.
Thank you. Carla, while you bring up Krisha, I just wanted to thank Nate for mentioning about that it's throughout the journey. We don't just look at training right at the end. It would be too late if it's, because it's done at the end, people, often it's thought about just before go live. So it is important to have it throughout the journey. And this brings me to the point that I'm hoping talking to the audience, you can see that how all of these are weaving into each other already, all these deliverables, and that these deliverables become live documents. So a lot of the feedback you'd get once you've done the change impact, once you've gotten feedback from communication, to keep feeding the training plan throughout the journey and refining the documentation. Thank you, Kyla, for allowing me to add
absolutely.
a little bit more.
And that is perfect. It was like you were reading the mind of this user, because this is a very similar question. So one of our LinkedIn audience members said, is change management something that can be dialed into the program at different points, or is it a big mistake to not integrate it from beginning to end? So maybe Nate, we'll start with you on that one.
Yeah, this is a great question, and this is something that really hits home. One of our biggest clients here at Third Stage, we kicked off about a year ago. They were about around 9 months into a technology initiative, the implementation program. We were called in, where I would say 9 months into a 24-month initiative, and really, I would say it's never too late to start. So it's ideal. Obviously the best case scenario is to start everything at the beginning. It's never too late to start, and you can always go through and you can make up the steps and you can catch up to where you are. It's like a lot of different pieces of a digital transformation. It's something that's really important that you address change, that you address the change impacts, the change initiative that you're going through. Never too late to start, and there's always something that you can gain out of it by doing it, even if it's really late within the project.
Excellent. And Donia, anything to add to that?
Yes. I want to bring in here, it's really great to bring in this element of a health check. I love this word. It's something that I've been more recently in my career exposed to, I think, because of these kind of scenarios that like this user has brought up, where things are not done up front. And I really like this concept of a health check. And as Nate mentioned, we are working with some companies that have actually had this pitfalls and not done it up front, and realized, okay, we need to start with this, or we need to weave it through. So we stop, we pause, we come in, we do a health check against all the categories, all the objectives of change management, look at what are the gaps, and what is the corrective action that can be taken.
All great stuff. And then we have a few more questions here. Do you guys want to address those now, or do you want to finish up with your PowerPoint and we can do it at the end?
Kyla, we've got one more deliverable to go through. So
Great.
just to connect all 5, and it might just close off the picture. Do you agree, Nate, that we quickly finish off?
Yeah, and KPIs are fairly quick, fairly
Yes.
straightforward. So let's do that, and then we'll jump into some questions. And I know we're running a little bit behind, so
Okay.
We could go through KPIs real quick.
All right, KPIs, as Nate said, very quickly, but very important, and something that needs to be looked at right at the beginning. If you remember with that readiness document we spoke about, we look into why is this change taking place. Already from there, you need to ask the question of what do we want to achieve and how will it be measured? And that needs to be relevant. It needs to be measurable. It needs to be agreed, so that come down the line, you press the button, you go live, and then you can actually measure both the success of the benefits of the change as well as the user adoption. And that will allow to take corrective action if something is picked up. I'm going to just move on to the how, because I know we've got very little time. Again, I could speak about it for hours. Go ahead, Nate.
Yeah, so basically this is KPIs are really something that we link back to the first deliverable that we start with, and that is really sitting down and talking to the end users and the leadership and saying, what is it that you, what are your goals from this new technology initiative? And it's really saying, what do you hope to get out of the technology? How are we going to measure what success is? Measuring, creating a measuring mechanism, and really sitting down and starting to say, can we measure how we're doing things today, and get a baseline for where we are today and where we will, and then start to then really track key performance indicators, not only on our current technology, but as we go live and as we go post live, and using the system to really sit down and say, how are we benefiting from this technology? This is really one of the most deliverables within a change management initiative. However, I say this is really probably one that organizations struggle with the most. It's really hard to define. It's really hard to measure. It's really hard to track. But organizations that clearly create KPIs and run their business based on the success and on the benefits that they're getting from their technology really see the most benefit from a new technology initiative.